I remember the way the air smelled that evening at the rehearsal dinner, a mix of ocean salt and the sugary frosting from the cake samples set out on silver trays. The resort at Clearwater Beach had strung warm lights through the palms, and everything glowed in that soft Florida dusk that always makes people look happier than they really are. I sat at the long outdoor table with the rest of the Keaton clan, watching servers weave between us with trays of champagne. Brielle sat across from me, radiant in a pearl dress that floated when she moved. Her blonde hair curled in big, perfect waves. She had always known how to command a room without even trying. I had spent most of my life shrinking at the edges of that spotlight. Mom and Dad stood up together near the head of the table, two glasses raised as if they were delivering some royal proclamation. The conversations quieted in little ripples, until everyone was watching them. David cleared his throat in the way he always did when he was about to make a performance of something. Mom smiled her polished smile, the one she used at her spa when greeting wealthy clients. Then Mom pulled a white envelope from her purse and placed it into Brielle's hands. Brielle gasped, pressing the envelope to her chest like she already knew it held something grand. When she opened it, she inhaled sharply, and tears sprang into her eyes. She stood and hugged Mom and Dad, who received her as though she had just returned from war, with medals pinned to her heart. It drifted to the table quickly, whispered from aunt to cousin to uncle, a number wrapped in awe and envy. $100,000. A wedding gift. A launch into her perfect life. People clapped. Some laughed through tears, and one of my uncles said something like, "That girl deserves the world." I sat very still, my hands folded under the table, reminding myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself not to make this moment about me. I had practiced that since childhood, the art of disappearing politely. As I sat there pretending to smile while everything inside me shifted, I sometimes wonder what people are doing when they hear moments like this. If you want to share, tell me where you're listening from right now. When Brielle finally returned to her seat, she was flushed from the attention, glowing the way women glow when the world bends toward them. She tucked the envelope beside her plate and looked around the table, basking in the admiration. Then her eyes met mine. It was not a casual glance. It was deliberate, sharp, direct. She looked me dead in the eye, the way someone might look at a bug they were deciding whether to crush beneath their shoe. The chatter around us softened, as if people sensed something was about to happen, but did not want to acknowledge it. Brielle leaned in with a smile that felt like a blade wrapped in silk. She said, "Failures like you do not deserve any help." Her voice did not rise. She did not hiss it. She said it clearly, calmly, the way someone states a simple fact. A few ants shifted uncomfortably. One cousin's mouth fell open. Mom dropped her gaze and fiddled with her napkin like she hoped no one had heard. Dad released a long sigh that sounded like resignation, not disapproval. No one corrected her. No one defended me. That silence was its own kind of violence. My heart did not shatter. It folded. Quietly. Neatly. Like something I had always known would eventually collapse. I felt heat in my chest, not anger, but an ache so familiar I almost welcomed it. I pushed my chair back, still silent, still composed. I excused myself without using the word excuse. I walked away from the table, from the warm light, from the sound of glasses clinking for Brielle's future. No one followed me. I think that was the moment I finally understood just how alone I had always been in that family. The drive back to my small apartment in Tampa felt longer than usual. The night lights along the causeway blurred at the edges of my eyes. When I parked, I did not cry. I sat in the driver's seat and placed both hands on the wheel until they stopped, trembling. I walked inside, set my purse on the counter, and reached for my phone. My thumb hovered for a breath. Then I blocked Brielle. After that came Mom, then Dad, then Logan, then every cousin, every aunt, every person tied to the Keaton name. It took less than 2 minutes to erase a lifetime of obligation. But it was the quiet afterward that truly frightened me. A silence so clean it felt unnatural. I grabbed my keys again and drove out toward Gandy Bridge. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed to see the black sweep of the bay under the moonlight. and remember that the world was bigger than my family and their favoritism. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and gasoline. I drove slowly across the bridge until I reached the midpoint where the water stretched on both sides, like an invitation to disappear into something calmer. I pulled over at a turnout and stepped out of the car. The night was warm, the sky clear, the water moving in soft, rhythmic waves. I tried to picture my life if I kept letting them carve pieces out of me. I imagined more dinners, more insults masked as jokes, more years of trying to earn a love that kept shifting further out of reach. I felt sick. I felt awake. I felt the undeniable pull of something I had ignored far too long. Freedom. Standing there above the water, I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided that I would disappear from them entirely. Not just for a few days or a few weeks. Permanently. I decided I would no longer wait for Mom to look at me with pride, or for Dad to speak to me with gentleness. I would no longer hope that Brielle might one day see me as more than a backdrop to her life. I would choose myself, even if it meant choosing a life without them. I got back in the car, closed the door, and sat for another long moment, letting the decision settle into my bones. It did not hurt the way I expected it to. It felt like a door unlocking inside me. I exhaled slowly, turned the key, and drove home along the dark stretch of highway. My phone did not buzz. No one checked on me. But for the first time in years, the silence did not feel like rejection. It felt like a possibility. That was the night everything changed. And at the time, I had no idea just how far that decision to walk away would take me. I only knew one thing for certain. I was done being the family ghost. I was done being the quiet disappointment. I was finally ready to build a life with no one's expectations but my own. For the first few mornings after that decision, I woke up in my little apartment in Tampa feeling a strange mixture of emptiness and relief. It was almost like stepping out of a loud party and shutting the door behind me, leaving the music and the shouting on the other side. The silence was unsettling at first, sharp in its own way, but I realized quickly that it was the first quiet I had chosen for myself in years. Those early weeks were a blur of long walks, quiet meals, and evenings spent staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I had done something brave or something foolish. My phone stayed silent except for work notifications. No calls from Mom, no messages from Dad, no dramatic outbursts from Brielle. It was as if the moment I stopped being useful, they all hit delete too. But the truth was that their absence felt easier than their presence. It took me a long time to admit that. Gavin checked in gently, always asking if I needed space or company. He had an easy steadiness about him, the kind that never tried to fix things that were not his to fix. We met for coffee near the marina in downtown Tampa, and I told him about the dinner, the insult, the envelope, the look Brielle gave me. Gavin listened quietly, shoulders squared and jaw tight, with the kind of protective anger I had never known from anyone. When I finished, he took my hand and said softly that leaving them might have been the first time I finally chose myself. I felt something shift when he said that. Like, maybe I deserved to choose me. Work became my anchor. My agency job was demanding, loud, and sometimes overwhelming. But it gave me structure. One Thursday afternoon in early January, I was eating a late lunch at my desk when Sasha Morton leaned against the doorway of my office with a folder in her arms. Sasha was the kind of woman who always seemed to be moving forward. Her dark hair twisted into a messy bun, her glasses perched low, her energy bright and unapologetic. She asked if I had a minute. I nodded, and she came in with that purposeful look she got when her mind was already 10 steps ahead. She said she had been thinking about the clients we handled along Tampa Bay and Clearwater, the waterfront hotels, the tour companies, the spas that catered to tourists. She spread out a few charts and laughed a little at herself, saying she knew it looked nerdy, but she had been tracking seasonal patterns. Then she looked at me with this spark in her eye and said that we could do it better. Just the two of us. Our own boutique agency focused on waterfront businesses, small, specialized, and tailored. She said the market was growing fast and that she trusted my instincts more than anyone else's. I remember staring at the charts, but seeing my life instead, the version of it that had always felt too far away. My chest tightened with the weight of possibility. It sounded thrilling, terrifying, too big for the version of me who had been told repeatedly to stay small. I told Sasha I needed time to think. She nodded, saying she understood, but the way she smiled told me she already saw the answer forming behind my hesitation. That evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the balcony of my apartment. The lights of the city shimmered in the distance. The breeze was warm, even for winter. I tried to imagine my future without Brielle's voice in it, without Mom's constant correction, without Dad's disappointed sighs. I tried to imagine who I could become without that weight on my shoulders. The idea of building something of my own, something no one could take credit for or tear down, stirred a quiet excitement deep inside me. But fear still whispered, what if I failed? What if they were right about me? What if leaving my family only proved that I could not handle pressure? I closed my eyes, took a breath, and remembered the look Brielle had given me at the dinner table, that cold certainty. Those words were spoken like a verdict. I felt a resolve grow inside me, stronger than fear. Maybe the clean break had created space for something new to grow. A few days later, while I was reviewing proposals at the office, my email pinged. I clicked the notification without thinking, expecting it to be another vendor. Instead, it was Mom's name on the screen. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The message was short. She said she hoped I understood how my behavior had embarrassed the family. When I left the rehearsal dinner early, she hoped I would apologize, especially since Brielle was under plenty of stress preparing for her wedding. She said leaving the table had been disrespectful and that she expected better from me. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. There was no mention of Brielle's words, no acknowledgement of how she had humiliated me, just an expectation that I would fall back into line. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment, but the reply forming in my head felt pointless. I closed the email and deleted it. Then I emptied the trash. The silence after that felt different. Heavier, but cleaner. Later that week, I met Sasha for a walk near Bayshore Boulevard. She talked excitedly about the businesses that were already showing interest in specialized marketing. I listened, letting the warm wind press against my skin, letting her enthusiasm blend into the steady hum of the waterfront around us. When she asked again if I would consider partnering with her, something inside me settled. I told her I was ready to try. She squeezed my arm, grinning like we had just unlocked a secret door. That night, I went home feeling lighter. I made myself dinner, put on soft music, and let myself imagine what the next year could look like. I imagined building clients from scratch, crafting strategies that actually worked, creating something that had my signature on it. For the first time in a long time, the thought of the future made me feel hopeful instead of trapped. As the days passed and Sasha and I began sketching ideas, meetings, and plans, I started realizing that this empty space in my life was not a punishment. It was the beginning. A blank page. And while there were moments I still felt that tug of old fear, the one shaped by years of trying to win approval that never came, it softened each time I pictured the agency Sasha and I were building piece by piece. I did not know what the next months would bring, but I knew I was stepping into something new, something of mine. And for the first time since walking away from everyone who claimed to love me, I felt the faint but unmistakable feeling of a door opening instead of closing. I did not know what the next months would bring, but I knew I was stepping into something new, something of mine. And for the first time since walking away from everyone who claimed to love me, I felt the faint but unmistakable feeling of a door opening instead of closing. By late January, that door had opened wide enough for me to walk through. With Sasha and I filed the paperwork for our boutique agency during the second week of December and spent the following month assembling everything we needed: a name, a small brand identity, a starter website, a handful of test campaigns, and a list of waterfront businesses we wanted to approach. It was chaotic and strangely exhilarating. Not glamorous, not calm, but alive. I had not felt this kind of energy since I was a teenager, dreaming of a life bigger than the one framed by Mom's expectations and Brielle's spotlight. Our first office was on the second floor of a converted house near downtown Tampa. The stairwell creaked. The ceiling fan rattled every time we switched it on. The windows fogged easily from the humidity rising off the bay, but it felt like a possibility. We set up 2 desks facing each other, a whiteboard from a thrift shop, and a tiny fridge that hummed louder than both of us combined. Every morning, Sasha arrived with a coffee for me and said something like, "Ready to change the world?" I would laugh, but a part of me hoped she was right. Within weeks, a boutique hotel on Clearwater Beach signed with us for a seasonal digital campaign. I remember standing on their balcony with my tablet in hand, the ocean stretching out below, thinking, this is real. This is happening. Soon after, a small resort followed. Then, a sightseeing cruise looking to refresh their image before spring break season. Each new client was a little spark inside me. Each email of approval, a small piece of validation I had never gotten at home. It was not about proving Brielle wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had been capable all along. During that time, Gavin was steady as ever. Sometimes he stopped by the office after work, bringing sandwiches or helping me carry equipment. He never hovered. He treated the agency like it was something important to me, not something he needed to fix or take over. He would sit quietly on the couch by the window, reading while I finished an outline or revised a proposal, and I found comfort in that simple presence. But even with the progress, there were shadows I had not escaped. By February, I realized I could not keep carrying the weight of my family in silence. I had spent almost 30 years trying to be invisible, then trying to be acceptable, then trying to be enough. I needed help untangling why those patterns held on to me so tightly. So I made an appointment with Dr. Callum Ward. He came highly recommended by one of our hospitality clients, and something about his voice over the phone made me feel like I could breathe. The first session felt like stepping into cold water. My thoughts scrambled for footing while he asked calm questions about my childhood, about Brielle, about Mom's quiet criticism, and Dad's unreachable approval. He used terms like golden child dynamic and learned minimization. I had never heard those phrases before, but they fit my family with uncomfortable precision. I told him about the rehearsal dinner, about the words Brielle spoke, about the silence that followed. He listened with a measured stillness that made it easier to keep going. By the end of the hour, I felt wrung out, but lighter, like some knot inside me had loosened. As weeks passed, the agency grew faster than we expected. Sasha joked that we were sprinting before we had even learned to jog. We spent long nights refining campaigns, calling vendors, adjusting visuals, building strategies tailored to each business's personality. Some nights, I would leave the office after 9, the bay shimmering under streetlights, my body tired, but my spirit strangely full. Around early March, I ran into an old high school acquaintance at a coffee shop near Hyde Park. She recognized me instantly and asked about my life in a tone that felt too curious. Before I could answer, she launched into an update about Brielle. She said my sister had been posting videos about the stresses of wedding costs, about things being more expensive than she anticipated, about feeling overwhelmed by responsibilities. She said this as if it were a sympathetic detail, as if Brielle's stress somehow belonged in my hands. I nodded politely, but inside, a flicker of irritation sparked. I wondered how someone who had been handed $100,000 could speak so loudly about financial stress. I pushed the thought away and reminded myself that I was no longer part of Brielle's orbit. Her drama did not reach me unless I opened the door to it. And I would not. Later that same week, Sasha walked into the office with her phone raised, eyebrows lifted. She told me there was rumor floating in the nonprofit community, something about Dad's organization facing a financial audit, small speculative whispers about mismanaged donations and unclear records. She said it casually, but I felt my breath catch. I had grown up watching Dad treat his image like a glass tower, spotless and towering and untouchable. The idea that cracks were forming now made something inside me clench. I told Sasha I did not want to know more. She nodded and let the subject drop. I stayed quiet, but the thought lingered like a small bruise. By late March, we received an email from a major sightseeing cruise line that ran from Tampa to St. Pete Beach. They wanted a full rebranding package, 6 months of work, a contract larger than any we had imagined this early in the game. Sasha screamed when she read it. I laughed so hard I startled the guy delivering mail downstairs. We signed the contract the next morning, shaking hands like businesswomen in a glossy magazine, even though both of us were wearing sandals, and our office fan was shaking above us. That night, I drove along Bayshore Boulevard with the windows down, the evening breeze warm and thick with the scent of water. I thought about how only a few months earlier, I had been standing on Gandhi Bridge, wondering who I was without my family's approval. Now I was building a life, piece by piece, a life that felt rooted in my own choices. I was not healed, not yet, but I was standing on ground that belonged to me. And as the streetlights blurred in soft gold streaks, I realized I was ready to step even further into the future taking shape ahead of me. I drove along Bayshore Boulevard with the windows down, the evening breeze warm and thick with the scent of water. And it struck me how only a few months earlier, I had been standing on Gandhi Bridge wondering who I was without my family's approval. Now I was building a life, piece by piece, a life that felt rooted in my own choices. I was not healed, not yet, but I was standing on ground that belonged to me. And as the streetlights blurred in soft gold streaks, I realized I was ready to step even further into the future taking shape ahead of me. By the time October arrived, Florida had entered that strange season where the mornings were cool enough to open the windows, but the afternoons still clung to summer. I had settled into a rhythm that felt like my own kind of normal. Early mornings with coffee on the balcony, long days at the office, evenings spent testing out ideas with Sasha, or walking along the waterfront with Gavin. For the first time in my adult years, I felt steady. Not perfect, not free of doubt, but steady. And I had not thought about Brielle in months, not really. That was its own small victory. The morning it happened was a Tuesday. I remember because we had a meeting scheduled with the cruise line at 10, and I had slept a little later than planned. I was in the kitchen spreading cream cheese on a bagel when my phone started ringing. It was Donna Hills, my neighbor from 2 houses down, a woman in her late 40s with a sharp sense of humor and a habit of watching everything that happened on our street. I almost let the call go to voicemail, but something nudged me to pick up. Donna did not even say hello. She said, "Jessica, are you home right now?" I told her I was. She lowered her voice the way people do when they are about to tell you something that does not feel quite real. She said there was a woman outside my house, blonde hair, maybe in her early 30s, very pretty but in a rigid, tense sort of way. She said the woman was driving a white BMW SUV with a big pink B&L sticker on the back. She had been parked in front of my driveway for a long time. Donna said she walked past on her morning route and saw the woman crying inside the car. Not soft crying, not discreet crying, but sobbing, like she had been hit by something she did not see coming. I froze with the bagel still in my hand. A cold, prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I asked Donna if she was sure. She said yes, absolutely sure. She said the woman had both hands gripping the steering wheel, her head pressed against it, her shoulders shaking. Donna said she had never seen someone come apart like that in a neighborhood, this quiet. Then she added a detail that made the hairs on my arms lift. She said the woman kept staring at my house between sobs, like she could not believe what she was looking at. At that moment, I knew. I did not want to know, but I knew. The description was clear as glass. Blonde hair, early 30s, a face that could go from charming to cutting in seconds. I am not sure, since there are so many white BMW SUVs, but with a big pink B&L sticker on the back of her car, there was only one person who fit that description in my life. Or rather, in the life I used to have. My heart slowed into a heavy, deliberate thud. I set the bagel down and walked to the living room where the morning light was, spilling across the floor through the tall windows. My hands felt clumsy as I opened the security app on my phone. It showed 4 angles of the property, but it was the wide view of the driveway that snapped into focus like a punch to the chest. Donna had been right. Front and center in the frame was a white BMW SUV. I recognized the model immediately. Trielle had shown it off in a social media post when Mom and Dad purchased it. For her, 2 years earlier. Now it sat directly in front of my home, angled slightly, as if she had pulled in fast and did not care how crooked it looked. but it was the figure inside that made my breath stop. Quiel was slumped over the steering wheel, her forehead pressed against the leather, her shoulders jerking with sobs so deep her whole body shook. Her blonde hair hung forward in messy strands. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Several times she lifted her head, turned toward my house, and stared with a look that was a mixture of disbelief, fury, and hopelessness. I had never seen her look small before. Donna called again while I was still staring at the screen. She said, "Jessica, I am telling you, I do not know what happened to that girl." But she was crying like someone cut her open. It was the strangest thing I have ever seen. She asked if I wanted her to come over, but I told her no, that I was fine, that I just needed to step outside and get some air. I thanked her for calling and hung up. I stood there for a long time, the phone growing warm in my hand. I tried to understand what Brielle must have felt at that moment. What had she expected? What had she imagined my life looked like after she told me I was a failure who did not deserve help? Had she thought I would crumble, or vanish, or remain in some dim corner waiting for scraps of approval? And now, here she was, sitting outside my waterfront home, breaking apart in a car that had once symbolized everything she had been given that I had not. At some point, the SUV pulled away. I watched it on the camera, slow at first, then faster as it headed down the street and disappeared around the bend. I wanted to feel nothing. I wanted to stand there with my spine straight and my heart calm. But the truth is something twisted inside me. The mix of grief, vindication, disbelief, old wounds reopening, new ones stitching themselves in strange, crooked patterns. Pain and release wrapped together. I locked the screen and sat on the couch, elbows on my knees, my breath shaky. I told myself not to care. I told myself not to get pulled back into the emotional gravity of my family. But it was like watching a ghost drag itself out of the past and stand on my front porch. It took less than an hour for the next part to unfold. I did not hear the call firsthand, but Donna told me later that she had been passing through the neighborhood again when she saw Brielle turn onto the main road. Donna was picking up coffee and happened to pull out behind the SUV. She said Brielle was on the phone, red-faced and gesturing wildly, as if yelling at someone who could not hear her clearly. Donna could not hear the words, but she could read lips enough to recognize the shape of my name. She said Brielle kept shouting, "Jessica," then something like, "How does she have that?" And then, a phrase that made Donna shake her head when she repeated it to me. That failure. That failure. How? Hearing it secondhand did not hurt the way hearing it directly would have. It felt distant, almost surreal, like listening to a recording of a moment you had survived long ago. But something unexpected happened to me. Instead of pulling me back into her orbit, it pushed me further out. Watching her fall apart in front of my home, hearing about her rage and confusion, made me realize how far I had drifted beyond the reach of her insults. She could not hurt me from inside her SUV on a quiet Florida street. She could not shrink me anymore. Not here. Not in this house I had earned with my own hands, my own work, my own rebuilding. Still, I could not shake the image of her face when she looked at my home, the disbelief in her eyes, the quiver in her mouth. I sat in the quiet living room for a long time that day, the sunlight moving slowly across the floor, thinking about all the versions of me she would never understand. The girl she mocked was gone. The failure she named had walked away from her and built something she could not have predicted. Maybe that was what cut her so deeply. Maybe it was not my success, but her surprise. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside and stood at the edge of the driveway. The street was still. The water beyond the neighborhood sparkled in the sunlight. I tried to imagine what Brielle had felt when she saw it for the first time. This house, this quiet street, this life that did not include her. Part of me felt a flicker of sadness, an echo of the little sister who used to look up to her. Another part of me felt nothing at all. And somewhere deep inside, a new part of me felt steady and rooted, like I had finally stepped out of the shadows she cast. I stayed outside until the breeze picked up and the air shifted warmer. When I went back inside, I checked the security footage one more time, not out of fear, but to confirm that what had happened was real. It was all there. Her SUV, her sobbing, her disbelief, her anger, And then her retreat. I closed the app and placed the phone face down on the counter. Something had cracked open in the universe that morning, and whether it was fate or karma, or simply the consequence of choices she never thought would cost her anything, I knew one thing for certain. The balance between us had changed forever, and the day was not even over. In the hours that followed, I found myself drifting through the house in a kind of quiet daze. Not fear, not a shock. Something in between. Like my mind was flipping through pages of a book I did not know I had written. Every room seemed brighter, every window wider, as if my home was reminding me that my life had not been built to haunt Brielle. It had been built to free me. Standing in the living room, looking out toward the water shimmering behind the houses, I realized it might be time to finally understand how I had gotten here, how I had managed to step into a life that once felt unreachable. So I walked to the back porch with a glass of iced tea and let myself remember. It had started months earlier, long before there was any waterfront view or cameras or unexpected visits from the past. Back when the agency was still a baby idea and Sasha and I were running on hope and caffeine. After our contract with the boutique hotel came through, the momentum picked up in ways that surprised both of us. The resort in Clearwater wanted a digital overhaul for spring break bookings. Then a beachside inn contacted us for branding photography and outreach. And then that 6-month sightseeing cruise contract landed like a golden anchor, giving us stability and a confidence boost we desperately needed. By early summer, our revenue was growing fast enough that Sasha joked we should start thinking about hiring help, maybe even an assistant. I laughed at the idea of someone answering emails for us, but deep down, it felt like we were on the right path. We were working longer hours, sure, but it was the kind of exhaustion that tasted sweet, the kind that let you collapse into bed, knowing you were building something real. Around that same time, Gavin and I had been talking more seriously about the future. Not marriage, not yet, but something quieter. Something like shared direction. He brought up the idea of me finding a place that felt more permanent, someone comfortable, where I could breathe and grow without the ghosts of my past brushing up against me. One evening, as we sat by the marina eating takeout from a local seafood place, he mentioned Venetian Isles. He said it softly, as if the name itself were delicate. He talked about the homes along the water, many older and needing updates, but beautiful in their bones. He said the area was growing. He said he could picture me there, sitting by the water each morning before work. I laughed at him, telling him that waterfront homes were far beyond anything I could afford. Gavin shrugged, saying not everything was as impossible as it looked from a distance. The idea settled into my head like a pebble dropped into a pond, sending ripples out slowly. I told myself it was unrealistic, but the thought kept circling back, especially during long nights at the office when the air felt stale and the upstairs neighbors walked around loudly enough to rattle my desk lamp. I started looking at listings. Not seriously, not at first, just scrolling late at night when nothing else could quiet my mind. That was how I found the house. It did not look like much in the photos. The paint was peeling. The landscaping was wild. The kitchen looked like it had not been touched since the 1980s, but the windows were huge. The yard sloped gently toward the canal, and the price was surprisingly low for Venetian Isles. I clicked through the photos twice, then a third time. Something about the house pulled at me, the way a song tugs at a memory you have not uncovered yet. I reached out to the realtor the next morning. Her name was Laura, a sharp and cheerful woman who had lived in St. Petersburg for decades. She met me at the property on a warm Saturday afternoon. When she opened the door and let me step inside, I felt a strange stillness settle in my chest. Not the uncomfortable kind, the grounding kind. The house was a fixer-upper, no doubt. The floors needed replacing. The walls needed patching. The bathrooms needed more help than I wanted to admit. But the view from the back windows made my breath catch. Water glimmering beneath the sun. Boats drifting lazily by. Palms swaying in the breeze. Laura smiled knowingly when she saw my expression. She told me the price was lower because the owners had moved suddenly, and the place needed more updates than most buyers wanted. But she also told me something else. Waterfront properties increase quickly in value during tourist surges. If you can hold on to it for a year or two, you might be sitting on something worth far more than you paid. Her words stayed with me for days. The practical side of me hesitated. The part of me shaped by Mom's constant warnings, by Dad's insistence on responsibility, by years of being the one who had to figure things out alone. But the part of me who had walked away from the dinner table, who had stood on Gandhi Bridge, breathing in the cool night air, who had built the beginnings of a company with her own hands, knew this was a turning point. I talked to Gavin about it. He listened carefully as I described the house, the repairs, the price, the view. After a long, quiet moment, he said he wanted to help with the down payment. 35%, he said. No hesitation. It was not charity. It was a belief. I told him I wanted the house in my name. He nodded. If this is your new beginning, he said, then it should be yours. His support did not feel like pressure. It felt like someone was handing me a map I did not know how to draw myself. With the agency revenue climbing, the fixer-upper pricing, and Gavin's contribution, the math worked. Barely, but it worked. So I made an offer. It was accepted within 48 hours. Suddenly, I had a house in Venetian Isles, a house that needed work and love and patience, but a house with a view that softened something inside me each time I stood in it. The weeks that followed were filled with contractors, paint samples, flooring brochures, and trips to hardware stores where I wandered in circles trying to figure out the difference between finishes. Sasha teased me relentlessly. She said I was officially a homeowner because I looked perpetually tired, had paint splatters on my shoes, and could now identify at least 5 kinds of caulk. Slowly, room by room, the house transformed. Not into something luxurious or perfect, but into something warm, clean, and deeply mine. The value rose as the work progressed, and when Laura stopped by in late September to see the updates, she laughed in delight. If you listed this tomorrow, she said, you could get around $2,050,000 without blinking. I told her I had no intention of selling. She said she knew. She said some houses are not purchased but claimed. Around that time, I had a memorable conversation with Eleanor Briggs, the woman who lived next door and spent her afternoons tending to her potted plants on the patio. She had the candid wisdom of someone who had lived enough life to stop, softening her opinions. She dropped by with homemade lemon bread and asked about the renovations. When I told her everything I had put into the house, she nodded slowly. Peace costs money, honey, she said, and you just bought yourself a whole lot of peace. I laughed at the time, but her words settled into my bones. Peace had never been free in my life. It had always been something earned, bargained for, or stolen in small, quiet moments when no one was paying attention. Now I had bought a home that wrapped peace around me like a second skin. But peace always has its shadows. One evening in early October, just a few days before Brielle appeared in front of my house, I was finishing up emails at the kitchen counter when a notification popped up on my screen. It was from an address I did not recognize. No subject line. No signature. Just 5 words sitting in the body of the message. We know where you live now. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for my heartbeat to settle. It could have been spam, a scammer, some random digital garbage that landed in my inbox by accident. But I knew better. I deleted the message but felt its imprint linger beneath my skin. Something in me tightened, something instinctive, something that remembered growing up in a house where privacy was a luxury I had never been allowed to have. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the large back window, looking out at the dark water. It was calm, still, the kind of scene that usually brought me comfort. But that night, I felt something else waiting beneath the surface, a shift in the air, a tension that whispered of movement in the shadows. The next morning, the white SUV appeared in front of my home. Looking back, I cannot pretend I missed the signs. They had been building quietly for weeks. The tension in Brielle's life, the pressure in my family, the shifting dynamics, that strange email. All small threads weaving into something larger, something inevitable. But when I stood in my living room, watching Brielle break down in her car, all I could think was that the house I had built, the peace I had bought, the life I had claimed, had finally come into full view for the very person who never believed I could have it. and her reaction had shattered something in the distance between us. I knew the story was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning to unfold. The days after Brielle appeared in front of my house felt stretched thin, like the air around me had been pulled tight. Nothing dramatic happened. No more white SUVs, no anonymous emails, no unexpected knocks. But something lingered, a hum beneath the surface, a presence I could not name. Life, on the outside, continued its steady rhythm. The mornings were soft and quiet. I would stand by the patio with a mug of coffee, looking out over the water as the early sun lit the canal in pale gold. Pelicans drifted across the sky. Boats hummed in the distance. Sometimes the surface of the water was still glass. Other times it rippled gently with the passing tide. I breathed easier here. Even on difficult days, the water helped me slow down, helped me come back to myself. By November, the agency had grown faster than Sasha or I anticipated. We brought in 2 part-time assistants to help manage the cruise contract and the new resort clients. Our office felt fuller, livelier. There was laughter in the hall, chatter over lunch, friendly debates about ad copy and color choices. I found myself smiling more, even on days when I felt tired. Watching something you built grow is a strange kind of joy. Quiet but strong. Gavin was patient with all of it, supportive in ways that made me feel grounded. Some nights he cooked dinner at my place. Other nights we walked the neighborhood, admiring the lights glimmering along the water. He began talking more openly about the future, not in a rushed or demanding way, but with a gentle certainty. One evening, as we sat on the patio sipping wine, he said he could see us living here long term. He said he liked the way the place felt, the way I looked when I sat by the water. He asked if I could imagine that too. I did not answer right away. It was not that I could not see it. It was that I felt something inside me still stirring, still shifting, something unfinished, something waiting. I smiled and told him I was figuring it out. He nodded and kissed my forehead. He understood me enough to give me time. That alone made him feel different from anyone else I had ever known. But even in the warmth of all that growth, there was a shadow stretching behind me. The security footage from the morning Brielle came had burned itself into my mind. Her shaking shoulders, her disbelief, her desperation. The way she stared at my home like it was an insult carved into stone. I had tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was her problem, not mine. But the truth was that I replayed it often, usually late at night, when the house was too quiet. There was a strange feeling to it. Not guilt, not fear. Something else, like standing on one side of a glass wall, while someone on the other side pounded their fists against it. She had seen my life. She had seen what I built. She had seen the piece I had carved out of the wreckage they left behind, and she had not been invited inside. That truth kept echoing in me. I talked about it with Dr. Ward during one of my sessions. He listened carefully, leaning back slightly in his chair. He asked what part of it unsettled me the most. I stared at the carpet for a long moment before answering. I told him that it was not her breakdown that bothered me. It was the realization that I was finally living a life I did not need to explain or justify. A life my family could not take credit for or diminish. I told him that seeing Brielle outside my house made me understand, in a new way, that I was no longer part of their story. He said that kind of clarity often arrives when someone from the past catches a glimpse of who we have become. Sometimes it brings closure, sometimes it brings conflict, and sometimes it brings an echo of grief for the person we used to be. I understood that more than I wanted to. Around the same time, Dad sent another email. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing a marketing proposal. The subject line was simple: from Dad. The message itself was short. He wrote that we should talk, that the silence was hurting the family, that he hoped I would show maturity and reach out. No apology, no acknowledgement, no accountability, just expectation wrapped in concern that was barely concerned at all. I stared at the message for a long time, my chest tightening in that familiar old way I had not felt since before I walked out of the rehearsal dinner. I read the line about maturity twice, Then a third time. It sounded like something he would say when I was a teenager, when he wanted to remind me that my emotions were inconvenient. I realized I had gone months without hearing his voice, without feeling that pressure in my ribs. And now, here it was again, a ghostly hand reaching from the past. I selected the message, deleted it, then emptied the trash folder. The moment I did, something inside me unclenched. A wall in my mind clicked back into place. I reminded myself that the silence was not something I had created out of spite. It was something I had created out of necessity. And if Dad wanted to break it, he could start by acknowledging what had caused it. A few days later, a new source of tension appeared. I was in my office early, sipping a cup of mint tea and reviewing analytics, when my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it until I saw the first words appear on the lock screen. "Jessica, it is me. Please do not block this one too." My stomach dropped. I unlocked the phone and read the full message. It was Logan. He wrote that he knew I did not want to hear from him, but he needed to see me, that he had things to say, that it was important. He asked me to meet him somewhere neutral. A coffee shop, a park, anywhere. He said he respected my boundaries, but begged me not to shut him out forever. I stared at the words, tightening my grip on the phone. Logan had been part of my life for years, long before everything fell apart, but he had chosen Brielle, chosen the path that came with her. I chose to stay silent when silence hurt me most. His last words to me before I blocked him had been something vague about family being complicated. He had not defended me. He had not stopped her. He had not stepped in when the room closed in around me. I placed the phone face down on my desk. I did not respond. Hours later, another message came from him, then another the following evening, shorter, more strained. I deleted each one without reading more than a glance. I reminded myself that the chapter of my life that included him had been closed the moment I walked away from that dinner table. Logan had been an extension of the old world, a branch of the same tree I had cut myself free from. I would not let him graft himself back onto my life now that things looked better from the outside. Still, at night, when the wind rattled the palm fronds outside and the house grew quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan, I could feel the past pressing at the edges of my mind. Not enough to break in, but enough to remind me it had not vanished. My life beside the water was peaceful, beautiful even, but peace does not erase history. It only makes the echoes clearer. Sometimes I sat on the back patio, watching the moonlight stretch across the canal, and wondered whether Brielle would come back, whether Dad would send another message, whether Mom was whispering about me in some living room somewhere, whether Logan would keep trying. I wondered how many eyes were on my life now, how many thoughts circled around my name, how many resentments brewed in silence. The house was quiet. The water is calm. But the past was not finished with me yet. I could feel it. The past was not finished with me yet. The confirmation arrived 2 mornings later, just as I stepped out onto the patio with a fresh cup of coffee. The early light had barely stretched across the canal. The morning was the kind Florida gets in late fall, when the heat takes a step back and the air feels cool enough to breathe without effort. The sky was soft pink and lavender above the water, calm in a way that made you believe problems could wait until noon. I set my coffee down on the small iron table, wrapped my sweater a little tighter around me, and let myself exhale. It had been days since Brielle parked in front of my home and cried into her steering wheel. Days since I watched the footage over and over until the image burned itself into the back of my eyelids. Days since Donna told me that Brielle, after pulling away from my house, had been screaming into her phone, shouting my name as if it were an accusation. I kept telling myself that the silence afterward meant she had gone home, recovered, maybe even convinced herself I did not matter. But somewhere deep down, I knew better. There are people whose pride does not allow for quiet, people who strike out, who push back, who scramble for control the moment they feel it slipping. People like my family. I had just lifted my coffee to my lips when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code wasn't. A part of me wanted to let it ring, to turn away, to pretend I had not seen it at all. But something stopped me. a feeling, a barely there intuition that whatever came next was not something I could outrun. I answered. The line crackled faintly, a static whispering in my ear. Then I heard her breath. Jessica. The sound of her voice hit me like a bruise being pressed. Mom. I did not respond. I let the silence expand between us. I wanted her to feel it, to feel, for once, the weight of a daughter who no longer rushed to fill the space, who no longer apologized before being asked, who no longer reached for scraps of affection. She filled the silence quickly. She always did. She said she hoped I was doing well, that she missed me, that the family missed me. Her tone was syrupy, too smooth, too practiced. It was the same voice she used when callers from the church committee reached out, when she wanted donations for Dad's events, when she needed someone to believe her version of the truth. Her voice never shook when she lied. That was her gift. I kept my voice low, steady. Why are you calling me? There was a pause. Not long enough to be honest, but long enough to betray hesitation. I imagined her in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, pacing near the island, twisting a napkin between her fingers the way she used to when she was, preparing bad news or a request I would later realize had strings attached. She said things had been difficult lately. She started with Dad. She said Dad was facing what she described as unfair scrutiny. Investigators were questioning his nonprofit spending. Donors were pulling back. His reputation was being dragged through gossip and misinterpretation. She said this as if she were reading from a script titled, "Please feel sorry for us." I didn't bite. I did not make a sound. I just listened. She moved to Logan next. She said he had been struggling, that his startup had faltered when the market dipped, that he had taken loans he shouldn't have and was drowning in debt. She said he was ashamed, but trying, and that she worried about him. I felt absolutely nothing. Then her voice shifted. A softened, almost trembling note appeared, one that told me she had finally reached the part she really wanted me to hear. She said Brielle was pregnant. 3 months. I closed my eyes, not from shock, but from the flood of old emotions stirring inside me. Jealousy, maybe, or grief for the version of me who once dreamed of being allowed to celebrate something beautiful in her own life, without competition. Or maybe just the memory of how many years I spent being measured against. Brielle, like she was the standard for womanhood. Mom kept talking. She said Brielle was not handling the pregnancy well, that she was anxious, overwhelmed, moody, that she cried often. The doctor told her stress was not good for the baby. Then she said something that made the morning air feel suddenly cold. Ever since she saw your house, she has been spiraling. Those words hung in the air between us like a bell that refused to stop ringing. So it was true. Her breakdown had not been about hormones, not about morning sickness or anxiety or mood swings. It was about me, about what she saw, about what she could not make sense of, about the life she never imagined I could build without the family she believed I was nothing without. Mom kept talking. She said Brielle felt abandoned by me, that the family felt shut out, that the silence was hurting everyone. She said it in a guilt-laced tone, as if I were responsible for their unraveling. Then she said they wanted to make things right. They wanted to rebuild, to heal, to reconnect. But her voice betrayed her, not openly, not loudly, but subtly enough that every word felt coated in a thin layer of desperation. And suddenly, sharply, like sunlight flashing off glass, I understood. They knew. They knew about the house. They knew about the agency's success. They knew my life was no longer the small, struggling one they had dismissed. They knew I had money, and they wanted access to it. Mom let her real intentions slip in the way she always did, hidden in one casual line. She said financial stability would help everyone breathe easier. Everyone. David with his scandal, Logan with his debts, Brielle with her stress. A whole family suddenly looked at me, not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as someone they had hurt, but as a resource. I let the silence fall again. This time I felt no guilt in it, no pull toward making her feel better, no ache to be seen. When I finally spoke, my voice felt grounded in something new. I am not agreeing to anything. If we meet, I will hear you out. That is all." Her inhale was sharp, controlled, a slip of surprise she tried and failed to mask. She said she appreciated it, that she would tell Dad and Brielle. That meant a lot. Then she said one more sentence. "I hope you come with an open heart, Jessica. The family needs you." Needs. The word hit me exactly the way she intended. Not emotionally, strategically. I hung up before she could say more. The canal outside was still glimmering with that pale morning light. The water looked peaceful, the kind of peace that felt almost impossible inside the home I grew up in. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, letting the warmth settle into my palms. My heart was calm, almost unnervingly so. I had not expected calm. I expected anger, fear, guilt. Some kind of emotional echo from the years I spent bending myself into shapes that fit their expectations. But none of that came. Instead, clarity poured through me like cool water. They were not calling because they loved me. They were not calling because they missed me. They were not calling because they wanted to fix the damage they caused. They were calling because they were sinking, and because the life I built looked like a lifeboat. That realization did not hurt. It was liberated. I stood from the patio chair and walked inside. The sunlight followed me through the sliding glass doors, pooling on the hardwood floors, like a reminder that the home I lived in now was mine. Every inch of it, every improvement, every moment of peace inside its walls. I had built it without them. I had built myself without them. As I walked through the living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead and the faint scent of the citrus candle from last night filled the space. Familiar. Comforting. My home felt like a shield now, a sanctuary, a boundary they did not get to cross, simply because they wanted something. I set my empty cup in the sink and looked out the window again. The water was turning brighter, shifting from pale gold to shimmering silver under the rising sun. I whispered the truth softly, but with certainty I had never felt before. I will hear them out. Nothing more. The words rooted themselves in me, solid, strong. For the first time in my life, I was preparing to face my family not as the overlooked child or the scapegoat or the disappointment, not as the girl they could manipulate with a sigh or a frown or a guilt-soaked sentence. I was preparing to face them as a woman they no longer recognized, a woman who had climbed out of the shadow they kept her in. A woman who owed them nothing. And as the morning sun climbed higher above the water, I knew with absolute clarity, the confrontation ahead would not break me. It would reveal them. The day of the meeting arrived with a strange stillness, the kind of quiet that feels padded, as if the air itself is holding its breath. I spent most of the morning cleaning, even though the house was already spotless. I wiped the kitchen counters twice, smoothed the cushions on the couch, adjusted the patio chairs so they were perfectly aligned. It was not nervousness that pushed me to move around the house. It was preparation. It was grounding. It was reclaiming my space before they walked into it. By 1:30, the sunlight along the canal was turning a deeper gold. Boats drifted lazily across the water. A heron stood near the seawall, its long neck stretched tall, watching the surface with patient stillness. The peacefulness of the scene felt almost mocking when I thought about who would be arriving in less than half an hour. At 1:58, my phone buzzed with a call from security at the neighborhood gate. They said a family of 3 was here for me. I told them to let them through. I ended the call, placed the phone face down, and stood in the center of the foyer. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not shaking, steady. By 2 o'clock sharp, a dark sedan rolled slowly up the driveway. It was polished to an almost blinding shine. Dad had always been meticulous about cars, about appearances, about anything the neighbors could see. That habit clearly had not changed. He stepped out first. His shoulders were pulled back, his chin lifted, his gray hair neatly combed, even in the afternoon breeze. He had the walk of a man who refused to believe the world could tilt without his permission. Mom got out next, smoothing the front of her blouse, her eyes already scanning the exterior of my home, as if assessing how well I had done without her guidance. And then Brielle climbed out of the back seat. She moved slower than usual, Her hand rested unconsciously on her lower abdomen. Her face looked puffy, her eyes rimmed in red, her hair pulled back in a way that lacked her usual precision. For a moment, I saw something fragile in her. But then she lifted her chin, and the familiar sharpness in her expression returned, just muted. I opened the front door before they reached it. I stepped aside without speaking and let them walk in. Mom murmured that the house was lovely. Dad nodded stiffly. Brielle looked around with a tight jaw, her gaze darting from the high ceilings to the wide windows that opened toward the water. I gestured toward the patio. We stepped outside, the air warm but softened by the afternoon breeze. The water shimmered beyond the railing. It was peaceful, too peaceful for what waited in the air between us. Dad got straight to the point, as he always did. He did not sit. He remained standing behind one of the patio chairs, gripping the top of it as if holding a lectern. He said the family had been struggling. He said the situation with his nonprofit had been exaggerated by the media and investigators. But repairing his reputation required significant legal expenses. He said the financial strain was temporary, but pressing. Then he moved on to Logan. He said Logan's business had collapsed because of circumstances outside his control. He said Logan needed support to restart. He said helping Logan would help the entire family. He spoke in numbers then, carefully, precisely, the way he did when presenting budgets or explaining medical bills. He said the family would need $180,000 for immediate expenses and $120,000 for Logan's business relaunch, $300,000 total. The words drifted through the air like falling ash, slow and suffocating. Mom added her own contribution, the line she always used when she wanted to close a deal. She said that family supports family. She placed a hand over her heart as she said it, her expression soft, hopeful, pleading. I remained quiet. I let them speak. I let them build their case. I let them show me the script they had rehearsed together. When they finished, I folded my hands on the table and turned to Brielle. She had not spoken yet. She sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes fixed on the glass railing as if afraid to meet mine. Her fingers twisted around the strap of her purse. When I looked at her, she finally looked up. I studied her face. The curve of her eyebrow, the tremble in her mouth, the exhaustion she tried to hide. And then, as gently as I could, I repeated the words she once delivered to me, with a coldness I will never forget. I said that at her rehearsal dinner, she had looked me directly in the eye. She had leaned forward slightly, so everyone at the table could hear, and she had told me those words. "Failures like you do not deserve any help." She winced. Mom inhaled sharply. Dad's jaw tightened. I kept my voice steady as I continued. I told her that I remembered every syllable. Not because it broke me, but because it revealed her. And then I said something I had repeated in my mind many times, but had never imagined saying out loud. I said that the failure could not help now. Silence fell so heavy it felt like the air thickened around us. Brielle's face crumpled. She shook her head and whispered that she had said it in anger, that she had not meant it, that she had been feeling stressed about the wedding, that she had been overwhelmed. She said she regretted it, that the pregnancy had made everything harder, that she needed me. Her voice cracked when she said that last part. She pressed a hand against her stomach as if to shield the unborn child from the tension in the air. Mom leaned forward. She said I could not possibly punish a baby for something said in the heat of the moment. She said the stress was hurting Brielle. She said the doctor had warned them. She said I needed to think of the future of the family. Dad said nothing. He stared at me with eyes that had once intimidated me into silence, but now they only felt distant. I inhaled slowly, deeply, the kind of breath you take before diving underwater. Then I told them that I was not punishing anyone. I said I wished Brielle well. I said I hoped her pregnancy went smoothly. I said none of this was about hurting her, but I also said I would not, under any circumstances, give a single dollar to any adult at this table. Mom's hand dropped from her heart. Dad's eyebrows shot upward. Brielle began to cry, a soft trembling sound that grew into quiet sobs. I continued, calm, grounded, certain. I told them that I remembered all the times they dismissed me, all the times they compared me to their golden child, all the times they ignored my achievements or minimized them, all the times I helped them and received nothing in return except criticism, impatience, or silence. I said that choices carry consequences and that mine now guided me to choose my boundaries, not their needs. Then I offered the only thing I was willing to give. I said I would open a 529 education plan for Brielle's baby. The account would be legally locked. Only the child would have future access to it. None of the family could withdraw funds. Not for bills, not for emergencies, not for anything. Mom sputtered. She said that was not what they asked for. David said it was an unnecessary gesture. Brielle begged me to reconsider. I did not. I stood up quietly and told them that the conversation was over, that they had been heard, that my answer was final. I said I hoped they found support somewhere else, but it would not come from me. I walked to the sliding glass door and opened it. The sound of the canal drifted in, a gentle splash as a boat passed in the distance, the call of a seabird, ordinary sounds, peaceful sounds. Mom stood first, her face pale. She whispered that I would regret this. Dad followed, his posture stiff, his eyes cold. He walked past me without a word. Brielle lingered. She looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand trembling as it rested on her stomach. She whispered that she was scared, that everything was falling apart, that she wished things were different. For a moment, I felt something twist in my chest. Not enough to bend me, just enough to remind me that I was human. That history leaves its fingerprints, even when we wash our hands clean. I told her softly that I hoped she found strength, that motherhood required it, that her child deserved a mother who could stand on her own feet. She nodded, defeated, and walked away. I closed the door behind them. The click of the latch echoed through the quiet house. I stood in the center of the living room, sunlight filling the space like warm water, and let the silence settle over me. It was not heavy. It was not cold. It was steady, peaceful. For the first time in decades, I spoke without fear, without guilt, without shrinking. I had chosen myself, and as I walked toward the kitchen to pour a glass of water, I realized the confrontation was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that came next. For a long moment after they walked inside, it was just me and the sound of my own breathing. The glass door was still half open, and a thin line of warm air drifted in from the patio, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and sunlight. I stood there with my hand still on the frame, as if I needed to feel the solid edge of something that belonged to me, something they could not reach. Behind me, I heard a sharp scrape of a chair. Dad. His patience had always been thin. It was never anger that scared me when I was younger. It was the way his anger seemed to say, "You have disappointed me so completely. I no longer recognize you." I turned slowly, my back to the water, my front toward the three people who had come into my home with rehearsed expectations, and now found themselves facing a version of me they had never truly believed existed. Dad was standing now, his hand still clutching the top rail of the patio chair. His face was flushed, the kind of red that rode just under his cheekbones when something did not go his way. His eyes were fixed on me, cool and hard. Mom sat beside him, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gripping the armrest as though she might fall if she let go. Quiel sat slightly apart, her body turned sideways, one hand cradling her belly, the other dabbing at her cheeks. Dad spoke first. His voice was measured, but the edge beneath it was sharp. He said he could not believe what he had just heard. That after everything they had done for me, I would sit in a house like this and refuse to help my own family. The words family and help landed heavy in the air, dripping with accusation. I felt a flicker of the old instinct, the one that used to make me scramble to defend myself, to explain, to soften him. But it passed like a shadow crossing the floor. I stayed where I was. I did not move toward him. I did not lower my gaze. I told him calmly that I had heard their request, and I had given them my answer. I said my answer included the education plan for the baby, and beyond that, there was nothing left to discuss. That was when Mom broke. She had been keeping herself together with thin thread, and the moment she realized the script was not playing out the way she expected, it snapped. Tears spilled over, sudden and dramatic, falling down her carefully made-up cheeks. She said she did not understand how I could be so cold. She said she had raised me better than this. She said I was turning my back on them when they needed me most. Her voice rose, shrill at the edges, the way it used to when she found a B on my report card, or when I did not react enthusiastically enough to news about Brielle. The familiar rhythm of her disappointment washed over me, but this time it did not sink into my skin. It skimmed the surface and slid away. I took a slow breath and felt my feet on the floor, solid and sure. Then, for the first time in my life, I said out loud the truth that had been sitting in my chest for years. I told them I did not owe any of them anything. The words felt terrifying and freeing all at once. I could see the impact land on their faces. 3 different reactions in the same split second. Dad went very still, as if stunned that I had spoken back in such clear terms. Mom gasped, one hand flying to her mouth as though I had cursed at her. Brielle stared at me with wide eyes, as if seeing a stranger sitting in the chair where her quiet little sister used to be. I did not stop there. I told them that they did not come here because they missed me. They did not show up because they wanted to repair what was broken. They came because they needed money, because they saw my life and decided it was a resource to mine. I told them that every time they had contacted me in the past, it had been with a need attached. Favors, support, emotional labor, performance. I said they never once called just to ask how I was and truly listen to them. Answer. Dad started to interrupt, but I held up a hand, and to my surprise, he fell silent. It was a small miracle that I took note of, even in that heavy moment. I continued. I said that when I left the rehearsal dinner, no one followed me outside. No one checked on me that night, or the next morning. No one apologized for the words Brielle used. They had made their priorities clear then. I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be cherished. Mom whispered that I was rewriting history, that I was exaggerating. Her mascara had begun to smudge under her eyes. She said they had always loved me, that they had tried their best, and that all families had their issues. Something inside me stiffened at the phrase "and tried their best." I had heard it too many times, used as a blanket to cover every cut and bruise. I told her that I understood no parent was perfect, but there was a difference between imperfection and cruelty, between making mistakes and punishing a child for not fitting a mold. Then I turned to Brielle. She flinched slightly under my gaze, as if expecting another verbal blow. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I reminded her again, gently but firmly, of the day she told me, "Failures like you do not deserve help," in front of our extended family, while they watched me shrink in embarrassment. I said that she had enjoyed that moment, the way it elevated her while it pushed me down. I said I had lived in the shadow of that dynamic for most of my life. Brielle began to cry again, quieter this time, less performative, more raw. She said she had apologized. She said she was apologizing now. She said she had been jealous and scared and under pressure, and she was not thinking clearly. She said she could not take it back, but she was trying to change. For a split second, the little girl inside me who used to follow her around the house, desperate for a kind word, stirred. I thought about the times we laughed as kids before everything turned into comparison, before every compliment given to her felt like a subtraction from me. But then I looked around at the scene as it was now. A grown woman in my home, crying because the person she used to belittle had stepped out of her reach. A pregnant woman who had come not to make amends, but to secure money and control. I told her quietly that I believed people could change, but change did not automatically restore trust. It did not erase damage. It did not entitle anyone to access the life of the person they had hurt. I said I did not hate her. I said I did not wish her harm. But I also said I no longer wished to carry the weight of her choices on my back. Dad exhaled sharply. He said that what I was doing was unforgivable. When I was younger, he had worked long hours and sacrificed so much to provide for the family. That this house, this career, this life would not exist if he had not raised me with discipline. He used the word discipline the same way he always had. as a noble excuse for neglect and criticism. I met his gaze and did not look away. I told him I acknowledged his hard work, that I knew he had provided food and shelter, and that I was grateful for that. But I also said that providing material things did not give him permanent ownership of my life. I said that emotional care mattered too, that being present mattered, that standing up for me when his other child tore me down mattered. I told him he had not done those things, and that I had paid for that absence in ways he had never bothered to see. He flinched them. Just a little. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, there and gone so quickly I almost doubted it. Hurt. Maybe. Shame. Maybe. But if it was there, he buried it fast. He turned away from me and looked out at the water instead. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched. He said he could not talk to me when I was being unreasonable, that he would not beg, that he only came here for help because I was his daughter, and he assumed family would be there in times of need. There was that word again, assumed. I let my next words come out soft, but I knew they would cut. I said being related did not give anyone a permanent claim on my energy, my time, or my money. I said that if he had wanted a different relationship, he could have built one years ago, with kindness and curiosity and respect. He had chosen authority and distance instead. These were the fruits of those choices. Mom had stopped crying quite so loudly. Now she sat with her shoulders slumped, staring at the table, her fingers tracing little patterns on the surface, the image of control slipping from her grip. She asked in a small, brittle voice, whether I was really prepared to live the rest of my life without my family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and thought about all the versions of that question she had asked before, the ones that were meant to scare me back into line, the ones that suggested I was nothing without their approval. I answered honestly. I said that if keeping them meant losing myself, then yes, I was ready. The words surprised even me, not because they were untrue, but because of how calm they sounded coming out of my mouth. There was no drama in them, no bitterness, just a fact. Silence descended over the patio. The only sounds were the faint slap of water against the seawall and a distant motor from a boat passing somewhere beyond the houses. A bird screeched overhead and then grew quiet. BL sniffled, wiped at her face with the back of her hand, and whispered something I almost missed. Thank you for the education fund. The words were small, sincere, stripped of the entitlement that usually colored her voice. For the first time that afternoon, she sounded like someone who understood that a line had just been drawn that she could not cross. I nodded. I told her it was for the child, and that whatever kind of family they chose to be, that baby deserved at least one thing in its life that was safe from adult manipulation. Mom made a soft sound, somewhere between a sob and a scoff. Dad said nothing. There was nothing left to say. I walked toward the glass door again and opened it fully this time. The gesture was clear. The visit was over. Whatever game they had hoped to play here had ended. Dad moved first. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and walked past me without meeting my eyes. The scent of his cologne brushed by, a familiar mix of cedar and something sharp that I had always associated with authority. It no longer made my stomach twist. It just smelled like a stranger walking through my home. Mom rose slowly. She paused in front of me, her eyes searching my face for any sign of doubt she could pull on. When she found none, her shoulders sagged a little. She whispered that she hoped I knew what I was doing, that the day would come when I would need my family and find no one there. I wanted to tell her that day had already come, many times, and I had learned to survive it. But I kept that to myself. I simply said, goodbye. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the sunlight as if it were too bright. VL was last. She stood on unsteady legs, one hand at her back, the other still resting on her stomach. For a moment, she lingered inside the doorway, half in the shadow of the house, half in the light pouring in from the patio. She looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and something that almost resembled respect. She said she understood that I was hurt, that she could not undo the past, that she was scared and overwhelmed and did not know how to be anyone other than who she had been told to be. She said she would try to do better for her child. I believed that part of her meant it. I also knew that trying and doing were not the same. Time would tell which one she chose. I wished her well, and I meant it. Then I stepped back and let her walk out into the light. The door closed behind them with a soft but final thud. I locked it out of habit, not fear. The car doors shut, the engine started, and the sedan rolled down the driveway and disappeared around the bend. The house fell into a quiet so complete it almost rang in my ears. I stood in the center of the living room, listening. No voices, no accusations, no old rehearsed lines, just the hum of the air conditioning and the distant rhythm of the water outside. After a few minutes, I walked out onto the back patio alone. The sky was wide and blue, the sun beginning its slow descent, casting a warm blanket of light across the canal. The water was calm, not a ripple in sight. It looked like a sheet of glass stretching away toward the mouth of the bay. I went down the small set of steps to the edge of the lawn and stood there, my bare feet in the cool grass, my hands hanging loosely at my sides. I watched the reflection of the sky shimmer lightly on the surface. Inside my chest, something I had carried for years simply was not there anymore. No frantic fluttering, no anxious tremor, no tight knot of dread waiting for the next criticism, the next dismissal, the next disappointment. For the first time in my life, I felt my heart sit steady in my ribcage. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the warm, faintly salty air, feeling the weight of my own body supported by the earth beneath my feet, watching the water lie flat and peaceful before me. And I realized that the line I had drawn that afternoon was not just between me and them. It was between the girl I used to be and the woman I had finally allowed myself to become. Time has a strange way of softening the edges of big moments. A year slipped by almost quietly after that afternoon on my patio, like a tide pulling slowly away from shore. There was not a single day when I woke up and thought it was over. The storm had passed. It happened in small layers, in routines, in subtle changes that added up when I was not looking. The agency kept growing. What started as two women in a creaky upstairs office over a noisy street turned into a real company with a real team. We brought on a full-time account manager in the spring, then a junior designer who reminded me of myself at 23, eager and nervous and full of ideas. The cruise line renewed their contract for another year. One of the resorts introduced us to a chain of boutique hotels along the Gulf. My calendar stayed full, my days long, my evenings satisfying in a way I had never known in my 20s. I still met with Dr. Ward, though less often. At first, I went every other week, then once a month, then only when something heavy rose up and I did not want to face it alone. We talked less about my family and more about me, who I was when I was not trying to earn love that came with conditions, how I handled success without tying it to my worth, how to let joy in without waiting for the punishment that used to follow it. Gavin was a constant through it all, steady, patient, never threatened by my ambition. Some evenings he would be at my house before I got home, grilling chicken on the small patio grill or stirring a pot of chili on the stove. Other times he just sat on the dock with his feet over the water, waiting for me to join him. We did not talk about marriage right away. We did not need to. There was a quiet understanding between us that what we were building would last. About 6 months after the confrontation, he did bring it up, though not with fanfare. We were sitting on the back steps one night, watching the sky turn purple over the canal. He cleared his throat in that endearing way he does when he is trying to be brave, and asked how I would feel about a small wedding by the water. No ballroom, no big production, just a handful of people, a simple ceremony, and a reception with good food and music. I felt my throat tighten, but in a good way. The picture he painted was so different from the spectacle that had been. Brielle's wedding, with its magazine-worthy decorations and carefully curated guest lists. I saw myself in a simple dress, bare feet on the grass, the sun dipping low as we said our promises, with the sound of water behind us. I saw Donna and Eleanor and Sasha and our small team. I did not see Mom or Dad or Brielle there. And for the first time, that image did not hurt. It just felt honest. I told him I wanted that. A small ceremony by the water. This water. This home. This life. He smiled and nodded and squeezed my hand. There was no ring in that specific moment. He gave it to me a few weeks later, on the same patio, on a quiet Sunday morning when I was still in my robe and my hair was pulled up and messy. It was simple and pretty and perfect. I did not cry then. The tears came later, when I was alone, and realized that the person asking me to share a life was choosing the real me, not some polished version he hoped to shape. My parents did not call. They did not show up. They did not pound on the door demanding a second chance. For that, I was grateful. Instead, every few months, an email would appear in my inbox. From Mom, technically, though the tone sounded like both of them. They were polite and distant, full of surface updates. Dad's legal trouble, Mom's health, the weather, a cousin's wedding. They never once acknowledged what had happened on my patio. They never brought up money again. They never apologized. For a long time, I did not respond. Then one day, in the late summer of that year, I wrote a single, short reply. I said I hoped they were well, that I was fine, that I wished them peace. I hit send and felt no panic, no trembling. It was not an invitation. It was a closure for myself, a way of saying, I see you from here, and here is where I am staying. They wrote back with a similar neutral kindness. It stayed like that. Distant, controlled, unemotional. It was not the kind of relationship I had once longed for, but it was also not the battleground it had been, and I realized I preferred calm distance to chaotic closeness. Brielle's reach was smaller, but more surprising. A few weeks after her baby was born, I received a text from an unfamiliar number, with a photo of a newborn curled up in a hospital blanket, tiny fingers wrapped around a pink knitted hat. The message simply said this was my niece and that she was healthy and strong. It was signed with Brielle's name and a small thank you for the education plan. I stared at that little face for a long time. She had Brielle's nose, but her eyes were deep and searching, in a way that reminded me of the women in our family who had always seen more than they were allowed to say. I felt a warm ache in my chest. Love, unexpected and quiet. I replied that she was beautiful and that I hoped both Mom and baby were resting well. I did not ask to visit. I did not offer to help. I did not push my way into their lives. Instead, we settled into an odd rhythm. Every few months, I would get a photo. The baby on a playmat. The baby is in a high chair. The baby holding a stuffed elephant. Small captions. Simple notes. No demands. I never talked to Brielle about the fund. I set it up exactly as I had promised. It was under the child's name. Structured so no one could pull from it for anything but education. It was my gift to a future I might never be part of. A way to break the pattern in at least one direction. There were still nights when the old ache stirred. Birthdays, holidays, days when I saw a family laughing together in a restaurant and felt a pinch of envy. I did not pretend those moments never came, but when they did, I stepped out onto my patio or sat in my office surrounded by the people who had chosen me and reminded myself that I had picked this life on purpose. I had chosen peace over performance, boundaries over chaos, self-respect over approval. One evening, about a year after the confrontation, I came home late from a client meeting in Clearwater. The sky was already turning dark, the last of the sunset fading in streaks of red and orange above the horizon. I changed into soft clothes, made a cup of tea, and stepped out onto the back lawn. The air was still warm, but gentler than in the thick of summer. The water in the canal lay flat and reflective, catching the last colors of the sky. A few porch lights flicked on in neighboring yards. Somewhere down the street, Donna's wind chimes tinkled softly. The world felt settled. I walked down to the edge of the grass and stood there, just like I had the day my family drove away. My bare feet pressed into the cool ground, my hands loose at my sides. I watched the way the light shifted across the surface of the water, how the reflections wavered and then steadied again. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who spent years twisting herself into someone more acceptable, the one who bent under small comments that cut deep, the one who bought into the idea that love had to be earned by shrinking. Then I thought about the woman I had become in this house, the one who walked away, who blocked numbers, who built a business, who fell in love without losing herself, who drew a line and refused to step back over it. The life I had now was not perfect. No life is. There were still bills and deadlines and arguments over little things like where to put the coffee maker and who left the light on in the bathroom. There were still family shadows flickering at the edges sometimes, but underneath all of it, There was a steadiness I had never known before, a sense of ease in my own skin. As I stood there watching the sun finish its descent, I heard my own voice in my head as clearly as if I had spoken the words out loud. I am not going back. The certainty of it did not feel harsh. It felt gentle, like placing a hand on a door and closing it softly, knowing you are allowed to do so. Knowing it does not make you cruel. Knowing it makes you honest. I am not going back, and that choice did not make me a bad daughter or a selfish sister. It made me a whole person. I chose this life. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.